It's Christmas Day, 1989. Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife, Elena, sit in a cramped courtroom. They know it's over, even though their trial has not even begun. Nicolae Ceausescu stands before the court and pleads his innocence. However, he and his wife knew the decision had been made before they even arrived. This is the end of the Ceausescus, and they know it. Our story starts on March 19th, 1965. Prime Minister of Romania, Grigoriu Dej, breathed his last. In the months that followed, Romania would select its new leader. And the man they chose was none other than Nicolae Ceausescu. From the start, Ceausescu was different from the other Eastern Bloc leaders. He openly criticized the Soviet Union and even embraced the West. Throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, Romania seemed like it was on a good path. Ceausescu met with U.S. Presidents Nixon and Ford and was even knighted by Queen Elizabeth II herself. However, this period in Romanian history was destined to end. In June 1971, Ceausescu and his wife, Elena, traveled to Pyongyang, North Korea. There, Ceausescu got a glimpse of what true authoritarianism looked like and envied the personality cult around their leader, Kim Il-sung. An elaborate display by the people of Pyongyang was set up, including a lavish parade featuring dancers and even portraits of Ceausescu and Kim. One scholar states that Ceausescu's Asian experiences had a profound effect on Romanian politics, but its effect was very indirect, which highlights the fact that following his visit, Ceausescu began to try and recreate North Korea in Romania under his vision. In the following years of the 1970s, Romania began to dive deeper into authoritarianism. Leading into the 1980s, Romania resembled North Korea keenly. Portraits of Ceausescu and his wife were displayed almost everywhere, from classrooms to offices. Additionally, there was a new fear for the Romanian people, the Securitate. As Ceausescu's cult of personality expanded, so did his grasp on the Romanian people's lives, hence leading to the creation of the Securitate. The Securitate was Ceausescu's secret police, which monitored every aspect of citizens' lives. When dissent was found, action was taken, usually brutally and swiftly. In almost every block, at least one resident was secretly a Securitate informant. When they found even a trace of dissent, they would report the person and their family up the chain of command. The Securitate even monitored phone lines and letters. And this is putting it lightly. To truly convey the darkness of the Ceausescu era, Eric Hahn and I interviewed Ramona Gheorghescu, a survivor of the revolution. How would you describe your experience in pre-revolutionary Romania?
I remember a couple things, meaning TV, for example. We had one channel. It was only a couple hours a day, half an hour of cartoons, and then like 1.5 hours of the dear leader visiting factories and shaking hands. And that was it.
So overall, how do you remember how you perceived the Ceausescu regime as it was happening prior to the revolution?
I was too young to have an opinion, but I remember my parents. Their strategy was to be under the radar and not protest anything. They knew what was happening and they just tried not to get in trouble. We had a certain neighbor who we knew was part of the security apparatus, the Securitate. He was in charge of reporting on everybody in the neighborhood, a couple of those apartment blocks.
And so, the climate in Romania had reached a boiling point. The years of oppression have taken a grave toll on Romanians. And so, when Ceausescu ordered the eviction of Laszlo Tokes, a priest from the city of Timișoara, immediately, public protested, sufficient enough to warrant a response from Ceausescu. And so, the events following were far from pretty. The following day, 17th of December 1989, was considered one of the bloodiest days in post-World War II Europe. Ceausescu ordered the Securitate and military to head to Timișoara throughout the day and night. The Securitate sniped down protesters, and the military relentlessly fired into the crowd. The atrocities of that day were often compared to the protests and resulting crackdown in Tiananmen Square, Beijing, earlier that year. This was the final straw for many Romanians. On the 21st of December, Nicolae Ceausescu gave what would be his final speech on the balcony of the Palace of Parliament. He addressed a large crowd in the plaza and the Romanian people through the television. The front rows of the crowd were filled with Ceausescu loyalists, bearing portraits of him and his wife, Elena, as well as communist banners. However, halfway through his speech, as he was describing increasing in pensions, the crowd erupted in protest. It got so bad that the live news feed was cut, and Ceausescu and his wife fled into the palace. The protesters never left. As Ceausescu and his top officials huddled inside the palace, bloodshed ensued in the plaza. Securitate agents and Romanian troops fired on the crowd, similar to the events in Timisoara. However, unlike Timisoara, the following day on the 22nd of December, the military defected and began firing on the Securitate. The events that followed were brutal. In the days between the 22nd of December and the 25th, any remaining support for the Ceausescu regime collapsed. Nicolae Ceausescu himself and his wife quickly realized this, and later that day they fled by helicopter from the Palace of Parliament. Initially heading north, the flight ended abruptly when the pilot Vasily Malitan landed the aircraft amid the threat of anti-aircraft fire. The couple landed near the town of Giesti. They then commandeered a car from a local and attempted to escape to the initial destination of their home in Snagov. However, they were detained by local authorities at an agricultural center nearby. Following their detention, the Ceausescus were immediately treated as prisoners. In the words of Elena Ceausescu, they were powerless now. The following days would be significant. On the 23rd of December, fighting intensified. The remaining Securitate forces were loyal to Ceausescu and fought brutally against the newly formed NSF, National Salvation Front. The public was also receiving conflicting messages. News of Ceausescu's capture was not widespread yet, and both loyal Securitate forces and NSF were actively pursuing them. 24th of December, Christmas Eve, the National Salvation Front had solidified its place as the central authority in Romania. However, the fighting was far from over. Bloody urban warfare in the streets of Bucharest and other cities ensued between the army, the National Salvation Front, and the loyalist Securitate. By this point, the news of the Ceausescu capture had reached the National Salvation Front's high command, led by former Ceausescu's minister Ion Iliescu, and they were held at a military base in Targoviste, preparing for their tribunal the following day.
Now we are where we began. Christmas Day, 1989, the end of the Ceausescus. At the same military base in Targoviste, the Ceausescus sat in a cramped room in front of a military tribunal and the cameras. The infamous trial would only last a mere hour. Nicolae Ceausescu repeatedly denied the accusations of genocide and undermining state authority, and so did his wife, Elena. However, the tribunal had already been instructed on their verdict: execute the Ceausescus. And so, when they heard the verdict, they faced the end. Nicolae Ceausescu began singing the Internationale, the communist anthem, and his wife pleaded with the soldiers, "I'm like a mother to you, please." However, there was no stopping it. Just before they were to be blindfolded, Nicolae requested one final wish: to be executed alongside his wife. And so it was. They were taken outside, blindfolded, against a wall, and shot dead before the live cameras. The couple that had once ruled Romania with an iron fist lay dead and filled with bullets before their former subjects. Following the end of the Ceausescus, Romanians expected instant reforms. However, the new government, led by former NSF commander Ion Iliescu, seemed to fall short on bringing such reform. When capitalism and free markets came, prices soared. Remnants of Ceausescu-era monitoring remained. Romania is still transitioning, even 36 years later. This story is often forgotten, but today, we remember.